8 films and 4 decades later, we think it's safe to say that the time for the Alien franchise to go is here. Its glory passed long ago, and fans, if there are any fans left at all, won't be a bit disturbed to see this ending. And the latest entry to the list, Alien Covenant, only solidifies our claim. In this video, we'll tell you why it's time for this franchise to end. First up, Alien Covenant was one of the franchise's lowest grossing films. The worst of the worst is here. Alien Covenant was one of the franchise's lowest grossing entries. It's only a step behind Alien vs. Predator Requiem, released back in 2007. That film made $52 million, and Covenant grossed around $67 million domestically against a massive budget of $97 million. Through and through, the film was a major box office flop, at least with adjusted numbers. But it wasn't just the box office here. Reviews were also just as bad, if not worse. The movie still made some money because of its loyal fan base, but critics have never been kind to this franchise, and rightly so. It isn't new for Alien films to get bad reviews. 2012's Prometheus had the same fate, even though it made $400 million worldwide. What's going on? Why are the movies performing so poorly? What went wrong? And where? Coming up next, the franchise started strong. After all, there's a reason these people thought the franchise was worth 7 more films. The making of Alien was pretty organic, taking up inspiration from 70s sci-fi to create the Xenomorph. The artwork for the monster was surreal and disturbing, bringing the monster to life. We saw many references in there as well. EC Comics, Forbidden Planet, The Thing from Another World, and Planet of the Vampires. All of these went through our heads as we watched the first film. The movie brought together horror and science fiction into one realm, like a twisted freak accident. And the best part was, Ridley Scott had left it up to the audience's imaginations. He used our minds as tools for inducing horror. Fear is believable, and we catch on to it pretty quickly. Let's refresh your memories with what went on in the first installment of this lengthy franchise. Remember the Chestburster's first altercation with Executive Officer Kane? After the encounter, the monster runs off before we can see its proper form. What do? We imagine. It's only when the team goes to look for the monster that Brett meets the full-grown Xenomorph. That too, in the dark. Up till that point, most of it had been left to our imaginations, and that sparked curiosity as well as terror. The director cleverly revealed the monster in bits and pieces, intentionally letting the audience decide the extent of its terror, and that was the best part. Now the sequel did well, but Alien 3 is where things start to go south. We've all seen the Xenomorph by this point in its completeness. The imagination has left the chat, and so has the fear. Now, all we feel is a sense of animosity for this monster. In the sequel, the directors had the real task of creating some thrill with the story that they had. Ridley Scott had done his part, create a hidden threat and all the possibilities that it presented. It was up to director James Cameron to respond to that fear, and he did well. We saw Ripley's survival skills in both films, and she became one of the most beloved and resilient main characters in cinema of the time. Naturally, people were glued and hooked for Alien 3. Unfortunately, that film didn't meet the high expectations that fans now had. Fans felt betrayed. The third film lacked the team-building atmosphere that was so deeply entrenched in the first 2 films. It was a very nihilistic approach to the story. Primary characters met their deaths left, right, and center. And as if that wasn't enough, we saw Ripley sacrifice herself at the end. We don't know about you, but that was the final straw for us. Alien 3 rid the franchise of its hopeful theme, and that was only strengthened in the subsequent films. The franchise started having crossovers with the Predator franchise, which wasn't well received either. For the big one, the franchise needs a proper send-off now. Economic and creative differences in the studio have hampered the franchise more than enough. We saw Hawley making the series Fargo and Legion, both character-driven stories that prove this man can do right by his failing franchise. The show will take place on Earth, which was an idea that was initially removed from previous scripts in the franchise. Having the Earth as the primary location gives the Xenomorphs the room they need to expand, but it's also pretty dangerous. It might end up taking the story too far, surpassing all the chaos we've seen before. Besides, haven't we gotten everything already? Prometheus showed us the history of humanity and how the Xenomorph came to be. Covenant and Alien Resurrection both played their part in introducing monsters that suggested crossbreeding between aliens and humans. It's safe to say that there's no mystery remaining here, and trying too hard to create one will only make things worse. Right now, all fans can look forward to is yet another showdown, only to be followed by another and then another. Where does it end? The franchise needs to make a decision. It needs to give us a concrete ending to this this endless conflict between man and nature, and it needs to be better than what we've gotten recently. Up next, all the films rehash the same old theme. We think we've established that the only way to save the franchise is by properly ending it now. But if the producers are so eager to continue it, despite negative reactions from literally everywhere, they need to be a little more creative. Try making something new instead. All the films we've seen so far have this common feeling of cynicism and harshness. This feeling made for a great atmosphere in the late 70s perhaps, because sci-fi was a relatively new genre. It was okay to refresh the concept for 2 more films because the genre was still growing. But we all know this formula won't work today. We've got new characters, somewhat different stories, and improved special effects. But the theme? It's the same as always, which is why we're getting tired of it. There's never going to be a fresh idea in there, and changing that can be quite difficult, if not impossible. And that's one of the franchise's major issues. Moving on, is the franchise close to ending? With a new film on the way? We don't think so. Scott is making another chapter of the sci-fi franchise, headed by Fede Alvarez. This time, we don't need to worry so much about the box office, because this film will be released on Hulu. Now, the film has already generated hype, despite being in the pre-production phase. Alvarez's amazing direction seen in Evil Dead and Don't Breathe, coupled with the franchise's fanbase, has done wonders to keep the excitement going. But for it to succeed, Alvarez needs to learn from the franchise's past mistakes and successes. The new film can potentially revive the Alien universe, but it needs to make a few adjustments first. Let's look at how Alvarez needs to ensure a better action to horror balance. We saw how the movies made the jump from horror to action in the revered sequel, while still retaining some of that original horror, just enough to keep us satisfied. But we've all witnessed how the universe has grown distanced from the OG action horror combination. We know what some of you are thinking. Prometheus and Alien Covenant were still sci-fi horror. You're not wrong, but the central identity, that mix of horror with action, is still missing, and it has been for a very long time now. Everyone would agree that Aliens is one of the best examples of action horror, not just in this franchise, but in all cinema. If the franchise must stick to adapting older formulas, we think it should draw more from this sequel than any other film. Alvarez can rebuild that nostalgic feel by looking at Aliens as a template, which would at least start the movie on the right foot. Next, we want more humans versus xenomorphs. The sequel is loved for more than just the action horror mix. It also showed the strength of the human characters. Ripley is a no-nonsense warrior who wants nothing more than to erase the existence of xenomorphs. It's not just Ripley. All the human characters readily stand their ground against the monsters, which has been sorely missed in the subsequent Alien movies. Correcting that in Alvarez's Alien would do so much good for the franchise. We don't need the Space Marines back, although some of us would love to see that, but just adding humanity back to the human characters will be a good start. If Alvarez can successfully manage to revive that same sense of humans versus the threat posed by the monsters, then we think the franchise still stands a chance. It would also be a great reminder of the previous films, especially the sequel. Finally, it'll be best for the film to come back to Prometheus reveals. We know that Prometheus and Alien Covenant were probably the worst films to come out of this franchise, but that doesn't mean Alvarez should distance his story from them. Those 2 movies opened up new connections between humans and engineers and the catastrophic threat of wiping out mankind. Creatures like protomorphs and neomorphs should be explored more. Covenant and Prometheus both introduced us to these monsters, so it wouldn't make sense to straight up abandon them. Instead, the new movie should explore them more, their roots, and even see the damage they can cause to the aliens' world. And that's not the only thing they need to bring back from these 2 movies. Now, this may be a personal preference of ours, but we think Alvarez should bring Michael Fassbender back onto our screens. David's character was one of the most praised parts of both Covenant and Prometheus, and he turned out to be a pretty charming villain by the end. Bringing David back would be amazing for the new film. We know we started this video on a goodbye note to the franchise, but some improvements can probably bring it back. If nothing else, Alvarez can help us say a proper goodbye. That's a wrap on this video. Do you think Alvarez can turn this franchise around? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.